Radiating from the heart of America and stretching from coast to coast and border to border, welcome to OnRadio, the wireless industry's weekly download coming straight from the builders and newsmakers of everything wireless. Your host is Jim Tracy, and this is OnRadio.
All right, wireless listener, we are back at OnRadio today, and we have a super show. It is featuring Sam McGuire. Sam is a Colorado State Ram, that's number one, and he is the founder of FieldSync, one of the founders of FieldSync, am I right? And then
Correct.
Also head of the NATE UAS committee. We're going to find out about what's going on with our industry and UAS. So, hey, Sam, welcome, man. How are you?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
It's good to see you. You're coming to us from the Denver area. What part of Denver?
Our office is over in the Inglewood area. So we're Hamden, Broadway,
Inglewood, okay.
right on the foothills.
So, all right. So we're thrilled that you're a guest on UAS for OnRadio. And one of the things that we want to do is pick whatever's left of your brain, because we need to find out more about this UAS and UAV. Let's start right there. What's the difference between UAS and UAV? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, typically in the context of the tower industry, it's depending on who's throwing out the bowcat. So unmanned aerial system versus vehicle. And now the big trend is uncrewed versus unmanned.
Yeah. Which is kind of weird because if you think about it, we don't trust cars, which have really tight parameters, to fly themselves, but we trust drones to perhaps fly themselves, and they have really wide parameters. So it's going to be interesting. But before we dive into that, there's a big deal going on about drones or UAVs made in China, and our favorite FCC commissioner, Brendan Carr, would be the first one to run to the front of the line and tell us why this is not a good idea. But are there good options in the free market for UAVs that are made in the West?
Yeah, increasingly so. I think, obviously, when we think about the gorilla in the room, it's DJI. And as you know, over the years, it's proven to be the most reliable off-the-shelf system to get commercial work done.
Right.
It kind of sits in that not professional, not consumer, kind of prosumer middle ground. But you can honestly pick one up off the shelf at Best Buy, and with the help of some flight software and a little guidance, do some really effective data collection in the tower space.
Right.
I think there's been an awakening over the last 3+ years that our space represents a lot of opportunity for the drone market. So there's an increasing concentration on supplying our industry with with solutions. But currently, if you were to look at scale, it'd be hard to replicate.
Well, we're gonna talk a little bit about more of that, but our folks in radio land, on radio land, need to hear a little bit to help educate themselves. So I'm gonna dive into this new language a bit. Tell us a bit about, like, when you think of a drone product, first thing that comes up is 2D. What is 2D?
Right. Yeah. So 2D is going to be your basic raw image data that comes off of any given drone flight. And typically, what we've seen, early on, 5+ years ago, there was a lot of interest in video, flying a tower and capturing, a 5-minute reel. We found that those became pretty large files, pretty hard to use, pause through and do inspections that way. So there then was a pretty significant gravitation towards 2D and the evolution of that collection to help provide additional context. Depending on what your deliverable is of the day, 2D from a drone is going to provide something that a climber can't see outside of a rad center, backside of a monopole. A lot of views that would be really challenging to find as a climber. And then that 2D obviously enables a lot of additional analytics down the road if collected.
Yeah. But a 2D at the end of the day is kind of like a picture that you can do something with, right?
Yeah, I think if you think about climb versus flight, and we're big advocates of the climb side of the business, so know the value there. But there is a ton of opportunity to free up the hands of technicians in our space if it's complemented well by a drone. So
Perfect.
360 top to bottom is very feasible and honestly pretty simple to execute against. And it gives you the ability to never have to go and retouch that site, right? You're not going to have missed data as a climber if you have a 360 top to bottom view that goes with it.
Okay, so 2D is in large part readable images. What then is 3D?
Yeah, so 3D typically, as we think about it in the space, would be taking 2D image data and running it through photogrammetry software to arrive at what they're calling a digital twin is the buzzword today.
Oh man, another set of big words that are just blowing everybody's brain.
Right.
Talk to us about 3D becoming first photogrammetry.
Right. So photogrammetry is software providers out there across the entire spectrum of offerings in the data acquisition through analytics pipeline. Photogrammetry is what helps us take that context-rich 2D image data, combine, stitch, and meld them into a single asset digitally.
Yeah.
So you can arrive at a 3D reconstruction of all that 2D data. You can navigate
layers of pictures that they join more than the edges. That like this would be joining the edges and they overlap the edges. So we get accuracy, right?
You get accuracy, and then you also get a different depth to it. So the key benefit of going from 2D to 3D is going from context to dimensions. So on the 2D side, it helps in inspection a lot. 3D helps us understand the dimensional characteristics of a site, of a rad center, of any
So
any
it makes it
different aspect.
measurable, right? I mean, then you can go, hey, this is that size.
Right.
This
and
is
that's where
site.
That's where you start to see, obviously, the 2D is immensely helpful in great context for what we've seen it augmenting traditional reports.
Right.
3D and the proper application of it is going to help us bring value. One single site visit unlocks value for everybody in the supply chain. Any stakeholder on that asset gets to reference something that they can make decisions off.
All right, just to make it totally confusing, the first introduction I had to imaging off a tower came from a company, and they said, "Hey, you got to see this. This is called LiDAR, and the first version of it was light detection, ranging, and the second of it was laser imaging because they had to have so they take these lasers and they shoot them out and they find a point, and then they say, "Hey, here's how long it takes to come back," and they create versions of, in this case, a tower. What is going on with LiDAR now?
Yeah, well, it's amazing technology. It's something that we're continuing to explore more. On the drone side of things, it's a very different economic price point, right? So barriers there, I think have stopped any kind of operation at scale. The other thing is it's a very different approach to data processing. And I think what we'll see is that terrestrial LiDAR, super powerful. It's a really great way to map the inside of a building, map a compound. I think on
a whole job site.
Easily. If you see like the Boston Dynamics Spot Dog, they're doing LiDAR scans of construction sites daily to understand what kind of progress and material sourcing. Sure. So I think it's definitely been proven out to be massively valuable. I think honing it into flight-based LiDAR collection is still definitely being worked out. And I think also, while the accuracy of some of the dimensional characteristics you can pull from LiDAR models is significant, you do oftentimes, if you're going to go out with one sensor at a time, you lose the photo side of it, like we talked about with the 2D, 3D comp.
Yeah, right on. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's just like picking all these points and then stitching those points together, but it's the amount of data and processing is just massive, isn't it?
It's massive, and you really, what we're finding across the industry right now, I think there are a handful of power users, but for the most part, we're talking about a very different approach to collecting data on site, getting it to the back office and turning it into a usable format. And that's
quickly.
Understanding how to do that is going to be what unlocks the value for telecom.
For sure. Speaking of that, I think we're going to talk a minute. I'm an unabashed capitalist, and I'm one of those weird guys who actually thinks there's a lot of merit in Kevin, Mr. Wonderful on Shark Tank. So what is it? Because, hey, man, if you're not making money with this, then it's called a hobby.
Right.
So what is the market telling us about UAS, UAV, drone inspection, asset modification, all that kind of stuff? Not asset modification. Let's strike that part, Ethan. Asset inspection. What is the market telling us about UAS, UAV, asset inspection from a financial perspective?
Yeah, I think, so when you think about the financial aspects of drones and telecom, it's kind of two-part in my mind. One would be, how do you mobilize it, and how does that fit into what we've thought of as, vendor services in the space for years? So rather than a traditional technician, you might find yourself with a single drone pilot instead of a two-man crew going out to do data collection. That changed the economics, and it's fluctuated a little bit over the last few years. The key component that the industry is still working through financially is, what is the ROI in the back office? I think the light bulbs are starting to go off for sure, but we're, even 5 solid years into large amounts of data collection. We have a complex ecosystem that we're trying to help evolve here, and people piecing all of those together. And so I think what we'll find genuinely is that if done right and used as a tool for the space instead of a replacement for traditional workflows, we're going to take a lot of the human capital effort and reduce the redundancy. Secondary site visits, third site visits for a single asset will be a thing of the past, because we'll have learned that across the entire supply chain, UAS data can be leveraged multiple times.
And that's really important, because there's safety implications there too. When you're climbing a tower less, you've got less risk of fall. When you are not returning to site, you're using less fuel. When we have a shortage of tower climbers in the industry, you're putting less man hours into a single asset. Isn't that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. We did an end of year survey within the UAS committee this year. We typically target the tower cos, the carriers, OEMs, so that we don't duplicate a bunch of data. And what we found was that we did about 85,000 estimated flights in the US this year. And if you were to think through
85,000 flights, that's awesome, man.
85, that's more than 50% year over year. We had 55 the year before that, for roughly.
Wow.
And when you start thinking through how that translates to impact on the workforce, a couple different ways you could think of it. One, on the climb side, if you're thinking about average tower being about 200 feet, that means we saved upwards of 6,000 miles of climbing. So if you factor the up climb and the down climb into it, what we told the UAS committee was, you could have climbed from Nate Unite this year down to Antarctica, right?
Yeah.
So there's really tangible, quantifiable benefits on the safety and ergonomic side of the business. But then when you think about some baseline assumptions, saying, hey, if those 85,000 site visits that were done with a drone save one redundant hour down the road, that's a ton of man hours saved across the space. And I think those are really conservative assumptions.
And we're already lean on labor, so that's really important. But two, the asset owners and the carriers are all really, really impacted somewhat by their perception of what's important in terms of being green. And when we're using less tanks of diesel to get out to a site, or when we're going out there in a small vehicle versus or an electric vehicle, which we won't get into that, but if we're going in a small vehicle versus a large vehicle with one person instead of 4, and I do say that I think that the smallest crew you can really theoretically use and stay compliant is probably 3 guys. Because if you got 2 guys climbing, you got to have 1 guy who's capable of rescue on the ground. Somebody's got to be able to call and help. So with that, there's incentive for the carriers and the asset owners to be smart. Are they willing to pay for it yet?
Well, I think one of the reasons we got into business, we saw there's some pretty significant gaps on some of the high volume side of workflows out in the field. So when you take a TIA inspection at NXJ 222 condition maintenance, that could be a 2-man crew pretty easily, if done right, and it's a required bit of work for all these asset owners. If done right, complemented by drones and a little bit of an augmentation to the workflow that the climbers are conducting, you could realistically enable a significant amount of the tower lifecycle. So you were just out there for the condition and maintenance assessment. Now, if data is collected properly, does that help enable SIDEC and the facilitation of a colo, the feasibility study that goes with that, and then potentially a transaction, which then engages the entire supply chain into top line, revenue generated work and network deployment and all the positives that we're out there trying to complete on a daily.
Yeah. Join us again in 2 weeks for more intel into UAVs or unmanned aerial vehicles. Hey, we'll talk to you next week, though, from Nate Unite 2023 from Orlando, Florida. But until then, let's remember to choose safety today. This is Jim, and I am out.
Thanks for tuning in today, and join us every week. Tell your people to listen in and subscribe to OnRadio, the voice of everything wireless.